Yeah, cold nights I must confess, yeah. There's something in my soul that kept telling me to hold on. Even when the world turned its back on me, I knew deep inside that I wasn't meant to be bad.
Welcome to When I Was Homeless, a podcast that shares real stories of resilience and hope. I'm your host, Gabby Cunningham, and today we're having an honest conversation about homelessness, not as statistics, but as human experiences. Each story matters, each voice deserves to be heard, and each guest brings us closer to understanding. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to thank you for your patience. We know this episode is coming to you a day later than expected, and we appreciate you bearing with us. Yesterday, I felt compelled to release a special episode addressing the urgent situation with the polar vortex 2025 and its impact on our unhoused neighbors. If you haven't already, I strongly encourage you listen to that episode. It's a powerful one and it highlights the immediate needs and challenges faced by those living without shelter in these extreme conditions. We're also working hard to compile a list of resources for those impacted by the polar vortex, and you can find that dynamic list at www.formybonuschild.org/polar resources. We're particularly interested in gathering local resources, so if you know of an agency or are affiliated with an organization that can help, please email us at polarresources@formybonuschild.org. Your contribution can make a real difference in someone's life. Now, for those of you returning to our regularly scheduled programming, thank you for being here. Today's episode explores the challenges of being homeless as a teenage runaway. I do want to mention that we'll be discussing some sensitive topics that may be triggering for some listeners, including sex work, sex trafficking, captivity, isolation, and abuse. Please take care of yourselves while listening. With that said, let's get started. Today's story is one of incredible strength and resilience, and I truly believe it will resonate with many of you. So, hi, Ronica. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you feeling?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm doing really, really well. Got through the holidays okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I know you've been living a nomadic lifestyle lately.
Can
you tell us where you're joining us from right now?
Right now, I'm joining from Cork County, which is in the south of Ireland. I'm currently I'm going to be living here for 4 weeks altogether. I've been here for a week, and I'll be here for another 2, almost 3. So yeah, right now I am in Ireland. I'll stay in Ireland for a while. But yeah, I've been around these last few years.
Would you like to tell us some of the places you've been?
Yeah, so my main base is in Ireland, so all of my stuff is in storage in Ireland. So I think let's call that home for now. And so I've lived in Spain. I spent a lot of time in the UK, obviously in lots of different places within Ireland, France. So yeah, all around kind of Western Europe the last 2 years. Before then, I've lived in Austria, Germany, India, and like longer stays in all sorts of other countries as well. But those were the places I've lived on kind of a long-term basis.
Wow, that's amazing. If you had to pick a favorite, what would you pick?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I think France. I is. I have a very deep connection to France. It's the ultimate place where I'm going to end up. So I'm looking to buy a house over the next few years in France. So probably central France, around Bordeaux, towards Marseille. That kind of area is just really beautiful, and I love it there. So I love the culture. I love the food. Obviously, I love the wine very, very dearly. So I think if I had to pick a favorite place in the world, it would be France.
I am a huge Francophile. I haven't made it to France yet, but I cannot wait. So,
It's so beautiful. It's so gorgeous.
all right. So, before we dive in, I want to remind you that this is your space to share as much or as little as you're comfortable with. Our
Yeah.
listeners are here to learn from you, and I'm here to support this conversation however I can. This is your platform.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to live such an adventurous and untethered lifestyle?
I mean, I don't think this was really a choice.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, no, to be quite honest, it wasn't. It
Mhm.
never really was. So I think, like, if we have to dive all the way deep down, I think it's a very genetic thing. So I am actually the fourth generation in my family on my Austrian side that has been nomadic. So let me kind of explain this. Um, so I'm half Indian, half Austrian, and my Austrian family. So I was born in India. My mother was born in Sweden. Her mother was born in Austria. Her parents before then were born kind of on the Italian border back when Austria didn't exist. And the parents before then were born in Switzerland. So there's never, and my children were born in Ireland. So it's been very nomadic on that side of the family. So I don't think it was traditionally even possible. Had I had my children in the same country that I grew up in, it would have been, I think, frowned upon. And then, on my Indian side, they are quite literally nomadic people. We were a nomadic tribe of goat herders, kind of traveling across the Himalayas in tents and clay houses. So it was so just genetically speaking, had I stayed in the same place, I think my genes would have had something to say about it. So I've always traveled. I've always kind of been on the road. But obviously, for most of my life, that wasn't really voluntary. So when I was a very young child, my mother would kind of just bring me to places and kind of, whenever pleased her, would just kind of rip me away from wherever we were and just kind of take me away. So that wasn't really great. And then in my teens as well, I used to just run away a lot. Um, so I lived in all sorts of really odd places that you wouldn't think. So I ended up for one summer, I ended up in like a hippie commune type place on the Czech border with Austria, where I just lived in like an old mill with lots of other people, and did all sorts of nefarious things. And traveled down to Vienna a lot during that time. Lived more or less on the street there. Um, so yeah, it wasn't always a really nice romantic kind of romanticized version of being nomadic. It was definitely in a lot of cases not voluntary. Um, so yeah, that's the rundown of it all anyway.
So, let's start at the beginning of this journey. Can you take us back to when homelessness, not inspired by like your roots, but as an adult, how that first became a part of your life? Do we want to call it homelessness or do we want to call it nomadic? How do you want to phrase it?
So there are definitely periods in my life when I was homeless. Like when the category would fit more accurately to call me homeless. Right now, I don't feel homeless. Right now, I feel nomadic. I feel like my name is on no lease anywhere or on no deed, but I'm quite happy about it. There were definitely periods in my life when I didn't feel nomadic, but felt homeless. So the first time I would have felt really, really homeless, I'd say the first time, still as a teenager, would have been that time when I ran away before I kind of got to that hippie place. Um, I was definitely homeless. I had nowhere to go. I was 15. Um, my mother didn't really care that I had left the house. I'm sure she thought that I'd be back. And I eventually, of course, I did come back. It's unsustainable. But um, the year after that, I ended up falling in with some very, very bad uh, circumstances And so at this point, it's probably wise to give a trigger warning. But yeah, so I fell into bad circumstances and I ended up in prostitution the year after that, the summer after that. And at that point, I still lived at home, but I didn't really. So I finished school, I finished high school, and kind of the summer between high school and when I started college, I went to law school after. Um, that would have been the first time I really, really, really felt homeless, completely homeless. And the what I did was I lived in two different brothels at the time. So I put all my stuff in a friend's place, and then in the morning time, I would go to this brothel that was open 24/7, and just kind of stayed there and had my shower there and had my breakfast there at the bar in the brothel. And then in the evening time, the other brothel opened, and I went to that and kind of slept for a few hours in the morning, before some guy brought me to the other brothel again. So those few months that I spent like that, I suppose I had a roof over my head. Sure, I always had a roof over my head. I had hot showers. The price I paid for that was obviously probably not probably not the price you want to be paying at 18 years old. So yeah, I mean, the traditional version of sitting on the street with a coffee cup, I didn't do that at the time. But that's a different kind of homelessness that I definitely felt. And I definitely felt that having no place to go to that was your own, and literally having not a second of privacy, and not even having the right to your own body most of the time, was a really very kind of severe sense of homelessness where I didn't even feel at home in my own body, because that wasn't even mine. So that would have been the first time that I really felt completely and utterly homeless.
And a lot of our listeners are here in the States, but we are international, obviously.
Well,
So where you are or where you were, brothels were legal, correct?
yes. This was in Austria. This was in Austria in 2009. 2009. So yeah, prostitution is legal there. Brothels are regulated, which I'm a huge advocate. I know it's beyond the scope of this podcast, but I'm a huge advocate for legalization and regulation of sex work, just because it shines a light on those kind of darker corners, and you know, where there's a light and where there's taxes to be paid, you can be pretty sure that a lot of the darkness goes away when the tax man gets involved. Or maybe more darkness is added. I don't know. But yeah. So yes, it was legal. It's legal for me to be there. I started working a brothel 19 days after my 18th birthday. I was working kind of more illegally before then, which, you know, as an underage prostitute, it's much more dangerous than it is to work in a normal brothel with a security guard at the door. So Europe is quite progressive in that sense.
And what are these brothels like? Could you describe, is it like a hotel room or a motel room or like
Um,
a hostel or?
it's Yeah. So the one that I was in during the daytime, and I worked in many different establishments during my time, obviously. But so let's if we take that kind of those few months as an example, the one I was in during the daytime, yeah, it was kind of like a motel, really. So it had like a big bar area downstairs, that felt like almost like a nightclub. And it was kind of like a nightclub almost. The atmosphere would have been very nightclub like. You know, it's like a pole in the corner and a bar, and lots of like little tables to sit at. And then upstairs there would have been like bedrooms. In that particular one, it was like themed bedrooms as well. So it was this really bizarre kind of fantasy world of like really strange, yeah, a really strange world. And the other one would have been quite similar, except it was a lot smaller. So it was just like a bar downstairs and then 3 bedrooms upstairs. So yeah, it was kind of like a hotel with a bar downstairs. So yeah, it's not as seedy as you would think.
So you were very young and very mature for your age. What were your thoughts when you were experiencing this? How was that for you?
I think like when you're in it, you don't really think about much. You kind of just take it. You take it for granted. You accept it for what it is. You don't really have the luxury of thinking about, what this means for your future or how much damage this is doing to your psyche, which is obviously a lot. How much this is going to cost in therapy in 10 years' time. You don't get to think about that. And it cost a lot in therapy. But but no, I don't really think I was so damaged. I was so kind of broken. I had been broken much like earlier. My parents were quite horrendous, and I don't think we should go too deep into detail because that's not the scope of this conversation. But really bad things happened, and those kind of conditioned me into believing that that was all I was worth, which is always what happens when we come into abusive situations. Our sense of self-worth gets destroyed, and our sense of the things that we deserve becomes transmogrified into something that is absolutely not true. So we feel like we deserve these bad things because we feel like we don't deserve good things. So yeah, when you're in those situations, I don't think you really think that it's quite as bad as it is. Looking back, obviously, you realize then that it's really quite bad.
You also had a period of being sex trafficked. Would you like to talk about that, or is that much further on?
I got an apartment actually when I started law school, which would have been September after I graduated, which was, I want to say 2009, either 2009, 2010. I cannot for the life of me remember. One of those years anyway. So I graduated in September, but then unfortunately the man I was with, my pimp for lack of a better word, was put into prison, and the money I was earning, so I had to stop law school at the time to earn more money. And then I wasn't earning enough money because obviously it was, I want to say 2009. Let's just put the year on there. And the financial crash was happening. So nobody was earning any money, and people certainly didn't have money left over to spend on girls in champagne in brothels. So I wasn't earning enough money. So they put me in the back of a car and drove me about 200 miles away into Innsbruck, where the money was better, because obviously it's a richer area, and it's a ski resort town, and closer to Italy, closer to Germany, closer to Switzerland. So you just have a bigger earning potential. And I was taken out of the brothel, which, like I said, there was a security guard at the door, and I was relatively safe. And was put in a room, which was back to like kind of illegal prostitution, with obviously no security, nobody knew where I was. My family didn't know where I was. Not that my family would have cared that much anyway. But yeah, I was kind of caught in that room until April, a year and a half later. So yeah, that was, it's not like, and I speak about this a lot, actually. It's not like the traditional trafficking that you always hear about, or that Hollywood portrays, where it's like, Liam Neeson and duct tape on your mouth and you're drugged and thrown in the back of a van. That's not what it was for me. It didn't feel like I was being trafficked. If you had talked to me in the moment where I was put in the back of that car, and told me that I'm currently being sex trafficked, I would have said, no, of course not. I know where we're going. I don't have duct tape on my mouth. But I was being sex trafficked. I was taken out of a brothel and put into a room for the purpose of sex, for the purpose of prostitution. And you can't really, there's no way of dressing it up nicely. That is what happened. And I wasn't, beaten up to be put into the back of that car. I sat down voluntarily, but that doesn't take away from the fact that that's what was happening. So yeah, I mean, yeah, those things can happen.
So obviously, you were only in it until the April of the following year, and I say
Mhm.
only tongue in cheek because
Yeah,
that's no.
it's a
So
long time.
yeah, it's a long time, and so please don't believe that I'm minimizing it.
Yeah.
Were you treated well during this time?
No. I mean, all of my experiences weren't as bad as they could have been. So I always do kind of put that quantifier on there, that I was not treated as badly as other people were. I never, and I'm so lucky for that, and I count all my blessings for that. I never had addiction problems, for example. Um, I was never caught in addiction, which a lot of other people who go through very similar things often are. So I was very, very lucky in that sense, that I didn't have that additional kind of, you know, really, really heavy issue to deal with. So that was a good thing. While I was locked in that room, I was, raped severely. I had my jaw broken. I was beaten. I had, people threatening me. I had more than one encounter with people who were going to kill me. Um, so I wasn't mistreated. There was nobody really there other than the people, who paid me for sex. Um, because my pimp had stayed in the place where we originally lived in, which was about 200 miles away. So I was just completely alone. I was just completely alone for a year and a half, with nobody really to talk to. Um, so I think the kind of sheer loneliness of it, on top of the abuse, was kind of almost the more difficult thing that I had to deal with. Because if you feel like you don't have anybody else in your life who could possibly understand the situation that you're in, um, that makes it that much harder to break out, because you feel like, oh, I must be the only person in the world who knows what it's like to be here. And that goes for a lot of other difficult situations, like domestic abuse situations, or homelessness in a different sense, where you feel like, oh, I must get out of this by myself, because obviously nobody would help me. So that just takes that much longer to get out of, when you feel like there's no safety net, there's nobody else who knows what this is like. So yeah, it was definitely not a good time. It was a very, very difficult time.
I am so sorry to hear that. How did you get out of it?
Um, I think I think the moment it was very gradual. It was a tiny, tiny, very gradual increase of spine. I think I didn't know that I was ready to leave until I was ready to leave, and when I was ready to leave, I just basically just walked out the door and faced the consequences. The consequences weren't as severe as I had imagined them to be. The man who had brought me into prostitution, he was also going through kind of a life-changing kind of experience at the time. So he was ready to let me go. And then he eventually, just after lots of fighting and lots of standing up to him and lots of standing up to everybody else, he just let me go after about 6 months of fighting and lots of midnight stalking and threats and all sorts of mess. Um, but it was an internal thing. It was I was building a spine, and I was coming to the realization that I deserved better. Um, and the fear of the consequence of what would happen if I left just kind of dissolved after a while, because I hit rock bottom. And that rock bottom is so important. I think and I've spoken to lots and lots of other people, obviously, who've come through similar situations, or especially the work I do now is with people who go through domestic violence situations, and they often tell me the same thing, that they couldn't have left until they hit that rock bottom. Obviously, people who go through addiction often have the same experience where they're like, I had to reach that absolute lowest point, at which point I didn't care what the consequences were. I just knew I needed to get out. So yeah, it was that for me. It was that same experience that a lot of people, I think, have experienced.
And what happened next?
Essentially, I got out. I fought and fought and fought for the next 6 months to kind of sever all my ties to that world. I met a very charming not young, 16 years old, very charming, middle-aged Irish man after I left, and decided very, very shortly after I met him that I was going to move to Ireland, which I did. So I left prostitution in April, and I moved to Ireland in November. And I lived here for 8 years. I had 2 beautiful sons with this man. Then unfortunately, it all went away again, which is where kind of my second big journey with homelessness and nomadic life began. Which was when I left him. I lived in a women's refuge for a while during COVID. And then I got a beautiful little house. So I was homeless, and then I was not homeless for about 2 years, and then since then I've been nomadic. So it doesn't stop. Oh my God, it never stops. Life just goes on and on and on.
It does. Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
when you were in the women's refuge, were you there a long time?
I would have been there a lot shorter had COVID not started. So I left my ex, and I left him just because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Really, I left him to go to the refuge. Had I had family or anything, I would have gone to family. He was not violent towards me. It had become an abusive relationship, but it was psychologically abusive. He was never violent, and he was a wonderful father to his children, and remains a wonderful father to his children to this day. But I had nowhere else to go. It was January of 2020. I had nowhere else to go, and so I literally just kind of grabbed my boys and ran out the house, because I just couldn't face having yet another fight, and I knew it was really starting to become very damaging to the boys as well, just to see us just treat each other like the way that we did. It was awful. So I called Women's Aid, and this is where kind of my activism started as well, and that's where I do most of my work now here in Ireland. And they said, yeah, there's a bed for you. We can get you sorted until the court date at least. So the court date was in February, and I think it was like one of the last days where the courts were still open. And then, of course, lockdown happened, and the country just kind of, everything stopped. So I was living in this house. I was in a room that was like the size of a hotel room. But when the lockdown started, obviously we had to stay in the room because lots of other people were in this house. So we had to stay in the room 23 hours a day with a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, which was like, I think that was the most difficult few weeks of my life. And then thankfully, we found a little house. And the boys stayed with their dad for half of lockdown as well, because I just didn't want to subject them to like 23 hours of prison. So that happened. And then we got a little house in Wicklow, which is a county here in Ireland. It's very beautiful, very rural. And we lived there for a while. So it was I think experiencing lockdown in a refuge was so like it was so surreal because I was living in like an institution type situation during that time. So all of the rules were obviously upheld so extremely strictly, because it was, all the social workers that were there, obviously we didn't want to put them in danger. They didn't want to put us in danger. So it was this really bizarre kind of situation where it was like a movie. But I'm still kind of looking out for people who come through that organization. I've helped some women since who reached out to me, and kind of I help. There's I think 3 paintings of mine that they put up there that I was able to give to them, so the women kind of have art to look at. I painted. They commissioned me to paint a mural on the back wall. So every family that comes through gets to put their little, like a little extra painting onto the mural, like a little starfish or a little like door in the castle or something. So I was able to kind of through art and through that kind of outreach, give back in a very small way, which is something I'm really, really happy about and really proud of. I was delighted to be called in. And I actually had this really nice experience where one of the ladies, while I was painting the mural, one of the ladies kind of came out, and she was very shy. She had never painted before in her life, and she was really shy, and she had obviously come through something really difficult. She was still, bruised. And she kind of took up a paintbrush and painted something for the first time in her life. She painted like a little fish. So it was like a really wonderful moment of camaraderie and giving back that I was really
That
happy with.
sounds
Yeah,
transformative and just what a
amazing.
beautiful moment.
It was amazing.
Okay, so you spoke a little bit about your advocacy, and I want to dive deep into that. Before we get there, what led to your nomadic life? What have you been doing with that?
Yeah. So 2 years ago, the house that we were living in, the landlord needed it back. And my film career was kicking off. So I was hired to be to direct a TV pilot. So we made the decision between the housing situation here in Ireland is horrendous. And I was looking for a different house. And after like a few months of trying to get a different house, it just wasn't working out. It was absolutely impossible. As a single mom, as a foreigner, as a person who works in the arts, with no like steady paycheck. I had more than enough. Like as a freelancer, I was making more than enough to support ourselves. It was just a landlord, if they see that, oh, you're an artist, you're a writer, you're a single mom who's an artist, we're not gonna rent to you. You're a single mom who's an artist who's a foreigner, we're definitely not gonna rent to you. So it was like this, I had like the perfect trifecta of undesirable tenant criteria, I think. So we decided, my ex and I decided together that the boys would live with him. He had a very comfortable situation. He had remarried. They loved their stepmom. They had their grandparents there. They had their little house there. They had like a dog and a house and the school just around the corner. And I had to go off traveling anyway for my film career because I had been hired to film this pilot. I'd been hired on a different project in different places. So I was going to have to travel a lot anyway. So we as a family kind of made the decision that, yeah, the boys are going to live with you. And I'm going to go, focus on my career. Which I've gotten a lot of like criticism over the years, which always kind of surprises me and shocks me when people criticize me for that, because had the situation been the other way around and the dad had to go off and do his career stuff, nobody would have batted an eyelid. And I see my kids all the time. Like, I'm the fun parent. I take them on like adventures and take them to museums and the zoo and whatever. Um, but I got some of the kind of, but you're their mother. How can you? So that's definitely still there. So we've work to do still when it comes to equality.
Yes.
So yeah. um, so that was kind of the decision that we made, and it's been working out really, really well for our family. It's been working out really well for my children. They're so happy and so well adjusted, and they live a really, really stable, wonderful life with their family. And I also live a nice life, and my children got exactly what they needed. So it wasn't a decision I made. Had it been up to me, of course I would have stayed where I was. I was very happy. But it was just the housing market in Ireland is just so dire and so horrendous at the moment, that this wasn't a choice that I made voluntarily, but I kind of had to make the best of it. So I do make the best of it. So yeah, that's kind of it. I was thrown into the deep end and then learned to swim. And he's a good father, and their stepmom is just the nicest lady. So and they've step siblings and everything. So there's like, whenever people kind of give me the look of like, you're abandoning your children, or oh, you're a bad mom or whatever, I'm like, no, I don't. No, nobody. There isn't a single parent in this whole situation that's a bad parent. So neither of us three are bad parents. So yeah.
I love that. Okay. So we're up to today. What are you doing now?
Right now, I am looking after some dogs in County Cork in the countryside. It's amazing.
Wow.
Before then, I lived in a manor house in kind of on the north side of Dublin, a little bit further out towards the sea, where I looked after an 86-year-old lady who she's a dame, and she was like just honored by the Nurses Association, because she built like the entire nursing college course here in Ireland. So she is this amazing CBD. But she's quite old now, so I look after her sometimes. I spent my summer in this huge big manor house. I felt like Downton Abbey. It was like this huge, and I had to take her on walks through her orchard every day. So it's really nice. I spent a lot of time in London, especially kind of over the last, not so much in 2024, but a lot of 2023. I was in London like a lot. So just from my film work and my writing. And then I spent a long time in Spain. So in Spain, I lived in this really amazing place. It was so spectacular. I lived in this house that was up in the hills behind Barcelona. And it was like surrounded by olive groves. But the thing was that the only road that you could use to get to the house, you had to drive through a river. But when it was raining, you couldn't get to the house because obviously the river is a river. So like you had to do you always had to keep like everything well stocked, because if it rained, you could not come down the mountain, because the river turned into a river again. So it was just this incredible, and I had like I had lemon trees, I had orange trees, and I was there during the winter. So all the lemons and oranges were just ready. So every day I made myself some lemonade with lemons that I picked fresh from the tree. That was so amazing. Like, oh my God, that was the best time ever.
It sounds it.
So
Oh my
special.
gosh.
Beautiful. It was so amazing. I spent a lot of time on the south coast of France, in Cannes, obviously during the festival, but then again, um, I made some amazing friends in Cannes. So yeah, uh, yeah, it's been pretty good. Like, and every time I'm in Ireland, of course, I get to hang out with my boys and kind of have fun with them. Um, so yeah, those are the kind of perks um that you get from a life like that. And I'm very lucky, of course, that I write. So a lot of my income, it doesn't really matter where I am. I've also done the grunt work. So when there's nothing going on with like my writing, or I don't have a commission, I tend to come back to Dublin and like take little side jobs. So I worked in a pizza place for a while I was in Dublin. So you have to take it as it comes. It's been a gap year. I think it's been a very long gap year for me, um, which is fine, which is fun.
And what have you been doing as far as your advocacy?
Yeah. So a lot of the work that I do is just face to face. So face to face with people who have gone through difficult things. So for example, one example I can give is my favorite example, because I always use it, and it's with her consent, and that's why I always tell that story, because she was like, "Yes, you can tell the story." Um, so one of the girls that came through the same house that I had been in, the same refuge that I had been in, um, she was interested in film, and she was very young. I think she was about 19 when she came into the house. So she came out of a domestic situation that was obviously, very difficult with her family. And the social workers reached out to me, as they do whenever there's like something that they think I can help with. In this case, it was this young girl was going to start film school, um, and she just wanted somebody to talk to, because she felt like, or she had kind of told them that she felt like it was completely impossible for her to ever uh, get started in film, because she didn't know anybody. She didn't feel like she didn't have any hope. She didn't feel like there was any chance for her. So they reached out to me and
Um,
said, "Well, the woman who used to live in your room, um, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, um, she works in film now." And so this girl reached out to me and sent me one of her scripts that she'd written, which is really good. Like, it was such a fantastic short script that she had written. So I called her back, and I was all enthusiastic about this film script. And she was just the most kind of uh, delighted. And I was so glad that I could help her. So I met up with her just to kind of walk around the park and give her a few pointers, give her a little bit of encouragement, give her a little bit of just, this is what it's like, and call me when you need a job, kind of thing. And then she said, "Oh, it's just so interesting that so many artists have come through this house, because there's this mural on the back wall." And it's just this really nice picture, and it makes me happy every time. And it's so colorful. And I'm like, "Is it? Isn't it now? Is it really? I'm so glad you like it." And she said, "Yeah, I know a woman who lived in the house painted it after she left." And I said, "Did she now?" And, I told her that it was me, and she was just so surprised by that. And I think it kind of made her realize that there's a life beyond, you know, being stuck in a shelter. Life goes on after. Life starts after. She's in film school now. She's going to graduate this year.
oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
she has helped me out on a couple of film shoots. So she's doing very, very well in her school. She is going to be very successful. I have no doubt. She has a job. She has an apartment. Um, so she really landed on her feet through very difficult circumstances. We still meet up. It's that kind of work that I do. So whenever it's not, I don't do a lot of organizing. I do organize some things. But it's mainly kind of face-to-face outreach that I do, which is where I'm best suited. I'm not super great politically. I don't think I could be a politician. I'm not super great with like organizing, but sitting down and talking to people, that's always been my strength. And then obviously this kind of work where I speak to people about issues, and how we can help. So that's also something that I do.
This has been such a powerful conversation. You are an incredible guest. I am so thankful for you. Yeah.
Thank
Is
you.
there anything else you want to share? I know that you have so many stories, so many experiences.
I'll share one more story, which I think will be really interesting to your listeners. And so growing up, I lived in this like really tribal community. And the story that always symbolizes that homelessness is such a problem, that shouldn't exist and doesn't need to exist, is the story of my aunt who lived under a rock. So she literally physically lived under a rock. So she was mentally not well. She had some sort of, we don't quite know exactly what her condition was, but she was not mentally in a place where she could look after herself. And had she been born in kind of a Western culture, she would have definitely been either in an institution or had to have, 24/7 care. But because it was a very poor community and a tribal community, that wasn't really available. That wasn't really something that you could do. And she didn't really like being in houses. So as a small child, she always ran away and hid under this rock. It was like a huge big boulder, and she kind of carved out a little cave underneath this boulder. So the community kind of realized that, this is where she wants to be. She won't be able to contribute to society. She won't be able to get married. She won't be able to have children. She won't be able to have a job. She won't be able to do anything. So what are we going to do with this lady? So they built her like a little house around the rock. They didn't force her to live in a house. They just built a house under the rock where she wanted to be. And whoever turn it was to look after her or to feed her, somebody would just always be there to feed her and to wash her clothes and to keep her company and to bring her firewood or whatever. So she lived her entire life under this rock. And in every sense of the word, this woman was homeless. Like, she didn't have a home. She didn't want to be in a home. She didn't want to be in a house. She couldn't. But she was perfectly happy and perfectly healthy and perfectly looked after, living under a rock. And it's just, that to me is such a beautiful imagery of why homelessness is such a made up construct. Because in tribal communities or in communities that are very kind of in tune with each other and have a very strong sense of responsibility towards everybody, homelessness doesn't really exist, because it's a given that people are looked after by your tribe, your community, or your family. So that's my parting gift. That's my last story for today.
I'm so thankful for that, because our nonprofit, For My Bonus Child, that is what we embody. We want to go back to a time when the community took care of everyone. Every child, young and old, belongs to the community. And if we all work together, we can all be taken care of.
Yeah, even if you have to live under a rock.
Even if you have to live under a rock. Oh my gosh. Ronica, this has been a beautiful conversation.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story with us today. To our listeners, remember that homelessness is not an identity. It's an experience that can happen to anyone. Before you go, I want to remind you about our special episode released yesterday, December 31st, 2024, regarding the Polar Vortex 2025 and the urgent needs of our unhoused neighbors. You can find a growing list of resources at www.formybonuschild.org/polar resources. And if you know of an agency that should be included, please email us at polarresources@formybonuschildorg. formybonuschild.org. Also, today's episode with Ronica touched on some powerful themes, and we've compiled some relevant resources to help anyone who might be struggling with similar challenges. You can find these resources at our website, www.formybonuschild.org. In the upper right-hand corner, click Podcast. Be sure to stay tuned. Ronica will be back later this year for an in-depth Part 2, where she will share more intimate details of her story, especially as it relates to sex work and being sex trafficked while homeless. It's a conversation you won't want to miss. If you'd like to learn more about the When I Was Homeless podcast or get involved in supporting our mission, please visit our website. Once again, that's formybonuschild.org. And please subscribe to our channel now so you don't miss any future episodes. Your support means the world to us. Liking and leaving a review on your favorite platform also helps us get discovered and allows us to reach more people and share more powerful stories. Until next time, this is Gabby Cunningham, reminding you that every story matters, including yours.